We're maxed out on credit cards, increasing our anxiety meds, and headed to marriage counseling because of money stress, all while making more money than most people in the world. And we don't think we have a problem. And then we have these stories. A widow who gives her last 2 pennies away. A Macedonian church that begs for an opportunity to give beyond their ability. A Savior who calls a man whose identity is wrapped up in money and things to sell his things and give away the money. What if our whole sense of identity changed? What if we didn't think our money was ours, or that things could fill the hole in our hearts, or that we needed to rely on ourselves for the things that matter most? What would it look like if we changed our definition of blessing?
Call it a tale of 2 identities. You can find them both in the 12th chapter of books, but 2 different books. The first one is in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 12, beginning in verse 13. Someone in the crowd said to Jesus, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Then Jesus said to them, "Watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions." And he told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. He thought to himself, "What should I do? I have no place to store my crops." And then he said, "This is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones. And there I will store my grain. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy. Eat, drink, and be merry." But God said to him, "You fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? This is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich toward God." Our second story takes place in the 12th chapter of Mark, beginning in verse 41. Jesus sat down opposite the place where offerings were put and watched the crowd putting their money into the temple treasury. Many rich people threw in large amounts, but a poor widow came and put in 2 very small copper coins worth only a few cents. Calling his disciples to him, Jesus said, "Truly I tell you, this poor widow has put more into the treasury than all the others. All the others gave what they'll never miss, extravagantly what she couldn't afford. She gave everything she had to live on. She gave her all." A tale of 2 identities. Maybe you've heard the phrase, "follow the money." Follow the money is a catchphrase that's everywhere. It's the title of a popular children's book. It shows up in investigative journalist TV shows. And where it really became popular was in the 70s with a movie called All the President's Men. And this is a movie about the Watergate scandal. And the idea was, if you just follow the money, you'll find out what somebody is really valuing and what's really going on. That's true, isn't it? Don't tell me your priorities. Show me your budget, and I'll tell you your priorities. It was Jesus who said, "Where your treasure is, that's where your heart will be also." Tim Keller preached an excellent sermon a few years ago, simply titled "Money," and 2 basic points that I'm going to be using this morning, and I'm indebted to him. He tells our time when he was preaching through the 7 deadly sins. And his wife said to him, watch this, "When you get to greed, nobody's going to show up. And she was right. He said it was strange. They came out for the sermon on sloth, which was, ironic. But nobody wanted to come to the sermon on greed. And the reason is because sloth and envy and adultery are things that we know we are or could be tempted by. But greed is something nobody thinks applies to them. And Jesus knew it. And that's why right here in our text in Luke 12, Jesus starts by saying, watch out. Be on your guard. Jesus never says, watch out. Be on your guard against adultery. And there's a reason for that. It's not as deceptive as greed. You almost always know when you're committing adultery. But you almost never know when you've gotten into the equally soul-destroying sin of greed. So Jesus is talking about what Keller calls money blindness. The deceptiveness of money and all the stuff we buy with money is baked into the system. Not being aware of the problem is part of the problem. Try this definition of greed on your side, see what you think. The excess concern for, the worry about, the love of, the need for money and possessions. It's killing us, and we are blind to it. People know that they struggle with sex. People will come talk to the preacher about their struggles with sex, but Jesus speaks about money 10 times more often than he talks about sex. I've never had someone come to my office and confess that they have a problem with greed. A few years ago, a book came out that said 1/3 of households making $100,000 a year in America feel like they cannot afford to buy everything they really need. What about those making $50,000 a year? 40% said that. Let's broaden it further. Overall, half the population of the richest country in the world says they can't afford the basic things they really need. According to the World Bank, 50% of the world lives on less than $5.50 a day. That's $2,000 a year. 70% of the world lives on less than $10 a day. That's $3,650 a year. If you do the math, that means that nearly half of American households making 25 times more money than half of the world, and 1/3 of those making 50 times more money than half of the world, think they're unable to make ends meet when it comes to what they really need. We are maxed out on credit cards, we're in marriage counseling, and we're increasing our anxiety medication, all because of money stress. While we make more money than most people in the world. And we don't really think we have a problem. Greed is a sin of the eye, and we're blind to it. And so Jesus is very, very practical when he says, watch out. Be on your guard. Don't trust yourself on this one. Open your eyes, put on your spiritual glasses if you have to, and ask yourself some good questions. Do I really need that? Couldn't I live more simply than I'm living now? Who else benefits from my stuff? How reluctant am I to share my things so people can enjoy them? Does my enjoyment coincide with the joy of others, or is it at the expense of others? Does my wealth really make me and others free, or does it enslave me even more? Do I fundamentally want the things that matter most in this life that money can't buy? Things like friendship and love. Am I ready for my friends, my neighbors, and my church to know my financial situation so they can pray for me and give me guidance on how to be better about it? Antidotes to money blindness. But the other thing Jesus addresses is money sickness. Money blindness is a sin of the eye. Money sickness is a disease of the heart. And there are 5 signs that you might be suffering from money sickness. Jesus talks about them in Luke 12. The first sign is gloating. When we look at the man in our text, he knows that he has more than he can handle, and he's about to get even more. So he thinks to himself, what should I do? I got nowhere to put my stuff. So I'll tear down my barns, I'll build bigger ones, and there I'll store all of my grain and my goods, and I'll say to my soul, you got more than you need. Rest, relax, and be merry. If you can't go 5 minutes without telling people about what you own or how much it costs, gloating might be a sign of money sickness. The second sign is worry. Worry. Do you think it is a coincidence that the very next topic Jesus talks about in Luke 12, after talking about the rich fool and his money issues, is worry issues? If you're constantly worried about money, you set your heart on money just as much as the person who constantly gloats about it. To worry is to set your heart on something. That means it's possible to be cash poor, but money sick. You can be money centered and not have much of it, whether rich or poor. If you think money is the answer to your troubles, it's money sickness. So worry's a sign. The third sign is resentment. Whether it's anger at those around you who seem to have more, or skepticism about your friends and family thinking all they want is more of what you have. Resentment grows where money is king. The fourth sign that you might be suffering from money sickness is that you go chasing after it. Look again at verses 29 and verse 30 there in Luke 12. Do not set your heart on what you will eat or what you will drink. Don't worry about it. For the pagan world runs after these things, and your Father in heaven knows that you need them. You see what he's getting at? People who don't know God, who haven't been converted, haven't been born again, they go running after these things. That's their calling card in their search for happiness and peace and contentment. Looks like the opening of the doors at Walmart on Black Friday. You might be chasing after wrong things, and chasing after them is a sign of money sickness. The fifth sign of money sickness is your inability to give it away. The rich man has 2 options about what he can do with his more than enoughness. One option is to store it up, which is what he does, more for me. The other option is to give it away. When Jesus confronts a different rich young ruler, do you remember what Jesus told that man? That man that wanted to know what else he needed to do to inherit eternal life. Jesus didn't say, empty out your bank account. Because people of that time didn't really have large bank accounts. What they had was land. They had treasures. They had possessions. So when Jesus says, sell your possessions, what he's actually saying is, I don't want you to give a trinket. I don't want you to give a donation. I want you to lower your capital. I want it to change and affect how you identify yourself. I want you to fall out of the bracket by which you used to gloat, and by which you determine what you chase after. Besides, you don't really need all that. To a man who's come to be defined by money, he offers him the antidote to greed. I want you to lower your net worth, and if you can't, then you've got money savings. It's too important to you. It's when we don't ask our friends, could I be giving more of my money away? Because we're afraid of what they might say. The standard place for giving in the Old Testament started with what was called a tithe, giving 10%, as a way of recognizing that what I have isn't mine. I want to give back to the Lord. That was the starting place. Now, it's true that in the New Testament, there is no amount given. You'll remember, Paul says God wants cheerful givers. But now that God has set us free, now that He has secured our place with Him forever, now that He's given us a new commandment, centered on two commands: to love God with everything we have, and to love our neighbor like we love ourselves. Studies show the average American gives 2%, and not cheerfully. I mean, after we take care of what we really need, that's all we have left. Well, what if our whole sense of identity changed? What if we didn't think that our money was really ours, or that our things could really fill the hole in our soul that only God can fill, that only God can fill by blessing us? What if it changed our definition of what it means to be blessed? Instead of looking at what we think will bless us, what if we looked at what God would do to bless us? And this is where we shift from the greedy to the giver. But hasn't it become clear by now that greediness is a common condition to humanity? Just as we're all sinners, we're all more focused on ourselves and on getting than giving. We're prone to rely on money for our happiness and security. So with all of humanity, we're greedy. But Jesus is the giver. For God so loved the world that He gave His Son. And this is love, not that we loved God, but that He loved us and sent His Son as an atonement for our sins. When we see Him hanging there on the cross, we come to know Him as God the gracious giver. But for you and I that have given our lives to Christ, we don't just stand in the shadow of the cross. We live in the fire of its creative embers. The cross becomes our pattern of life. And that means that there's going to be moments, slices of life, when people will watch what we do and how we act and what we value, and they'll say, that reminds me of Jesus. 2 Corinthians 8 is a great example. Paul is telling the Corinthians about a need some people have. And he begins by saying, I've got to tell you about a change of identity and what it looks like. Let me tell you what I just witnessed among the Macedonian churches, says Paul. In the midst of a very severe trial, they were going through a really bad time. They were about to put out a GoFundMe page because it made sense. But instead of getting, when they heard about this need, they said, how can I be a part? Oh, no, you're not going to leave me out of this grace. And the text says, they gave more than they were able, and they kept giving. And it wasn't because I asked for it, says Paul. They did it entirely on their own. It was spontaneous. They wanted to be part of the privilege of helping out in the relief of poor Christians. And why in the world would they think this way? Paul gives us a clue. They first given themselves unreservedly to the Lord. Other giving simply flowed out of the purposes of God working in their lives. I think it helps us understand the woman in Mark 12. The widow had nothing on earth except for 2 copper coins. It's all she had to live on. If anyone had a reasonable excuse to keep that money, it was her. If she had split the money, she has 2 coins. What if she had given one to the Lord and kept one for herself? We would stand and applaud her. But it never crossed her mind. And the reason why is because she had already given herself to the Lord. What is it that I think I need to hang on to provide for? If my life is already hidden with God, and if He provides my every need. It's not a story about money. It's a story about discipleship. Listen to the logic of Paul's argument in 2 Corinthians 8 and 9. Christ left the splendor of heaven, and He became poor so that you might be rich. And God rewarded Him, supplying His every need. This makes Christ the ultimate, indescribable gift, because He first gave Himself, and God exalted Him. You see the argument in Philippians 2. But you see it played out in Luke 12 as well. Christ became poor so you might become rich, while the rich man wanted to stay rich even if it meant everybody else was poor. And God didn't reward him. Took his life away. Because whoever saves his life will lose it. Whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. That's right. There's no need to worry about food and clothes. No need to hoard and store. God will supply your every need. Just as Jesus gave Himself first. And the Corinthians gave themselves first to the Lord. You and I seek the kingdom first. And God will give all these things that we need. Giving of ourselves is what we do when you're on a cross. So here's the question. Where can I see the cross in my financial life? The centrality of the cross means mammon can't be my God. Is it? The suffering of the cross means I shouldn't look to money to keep me from suffering. Do I? The humility of the cross means I shouldn't boast about my savings or my investing or my giving, do I? The daily nature of the cross means my value and what I value is tied to what I take with me when I die. Is that obvious? Some of you may know that for 3 years I served as a chief fundraiser for the school. When we started a capital campaign, we enlisted the help of a man named Clark Dickerson, a veteran in the field. He's very good at what he does. He's helped Free Hardeman raise their capital campaign, which is now up to, I think, $100 million. He has some great lines that are helpful. People like him. Have you ever heard the phrase, give until it hurts? Is that a terrible thing to tell somebody? So I tell people, give until it feels good. I like it. But his standard speech involved 3 points that I would adopted. 3 lines I'd like to share with you. First, God is the owner of all. We see it, for example, in Psalm 50 in verse 10. All the hills are mine, all the cattle on 1,000 hills, every dish in my cupboard, every dime in my pocket, every square inch of land, every single thing that you can see, God owns it. It's His. It's all His. The people who understand this best are the people who have already given their lives to Him. My baptism included my pockets. Everything I have belongs to God. I know it. I announced it in my baptism. God is the owner of all. Second, we are stewards, not owners. 1 Peter 4 and verse 10, as stewards, we are to live. Remember that charge that God gave in the days of Malachi? When the man robbed God and the people said, are you kidding me? How in the world have we robbed you? I didn't take a thing that belongs to you. But don't you see? Everything I have belongs to Him. And that means everything I do with money, things, possessions, I'm using his money to purchase things and to use them for my own use, but we're stewards, not owners. We have to reimagine that paycheck. You and I are God's money managers. When you go to a money manager to help you think about how to make your money work for you long term, how to invest, how to use it wisely, your money manager is going to ask you some good questions. What are your values so I can invest this money well for you? And as the money grows, your manager is going to make moves that align with your values. If they don't do that, they don't operate according to your own interests and values. You're defrauding your investor if you're not using it according to his values. So, for those of us who believe that everything belongs to God, and we're stewards, not owners, we need to ask ourselves, what does God value? Am I investing his money that he gave me on loan in ways that align with his values? He tells us some things. He wants peace in the community. He wants equality in the church. He wants the hungry fed. He wants justice to be done. He wants humans to flourish in the world. He loves beauty and goodness and truth. He wants relationships to be rich and deep. He wants us to become better people, not miserable misers. And third, we are blessed to bless others. We use the word blessed synonymous with having more. Having more money, having more stuff means we're blessed. I'm convinced that's a mistake. It's something, if God takes something from us to help us be more focused on him, that's a blessing. If something takes us away from God, it's not a blessing. What if God's blessing us means we have more strength and courage to give away and let things go? What if being blessed means the ability to be an example of what it looks like to be full of God? That is what Jesus was offering the rich young ruler, maybe for the first time in his life, to be truly blessed. If you have ever spent any part of your life trying to keep up with the Joneses, you'll understand what a blessing it would have been. He could finally know what Jesus meant when he said, "Blessed are the poor, the meek, and those who hunger and thirst." Basil was a Christian in the 4th century. He inherited a large fortune in the Eastern Roman Empire. But when he became a Christian, his value system changed. And he spent his entire fortune building the first hospitals in history for all in need. And he stayed devoted to his work until the day he died. And he died penniless, but rich indeed. Christian history tells story after story of people who heard the good news of Jesus and first gave themselves to the Lord. And as a result, they said, what has to change to align with God's values so they freed their slaves, the source of their livelihood? With no one to run the large vineyard, they went into financial ruin, but their decision lasted others. Realigning your value system may mean you pay your workers more out of your own paycheck because they're your employees. For 3 years, rubbing shoulders with some deep-pocketed people, I learned some good lessons. One of which is that it's possible to have lots of money and still be a good, decent, joyful person. I know that. It's rarer than the world thinks, but it's possible. To a person, the joyful rich man was a living rich man. And he found his riches not in his money, but in his relationships. There's a plaque on the side of Westminster Abbey in honor of a Miss Catherine Bouvier, and it reads like this: "It pleased God to bless her with a considerable estate, with which a liberal hand, guided by wisdom and piety, she employed to his glory and the good of her neighbors. Her domestic expenses were managed with the decency and dignity suitable for her fortune, but with a frugality that made her income abound to all proper objects of charity and to the relief of those in need. The encouragement of the industrious and the instruction of the ignorant she distributed not only but with joy, which upon occasion of raising or refreshing the spirit of the afflicted, she could not refrain from breaking forth into tears flowing from a heart thoroughly affected with compassion and benevolence. In 1909, George Pepperdine was only 23 years old, but he sensed the automobile was really going to take off. And so with only $5 invested, he started Western Auto Supply Company. And like a car, it really took off. He was so wealthy, he started Pepperdine University in the midst of the Great Depression. He had some great quotes. Here's one. "I consider it wrong to build up a great fortune and use it selfishly." But you know, he was a businessman. And in addition to starting a college and giving great sums of money to its success, he also invested and reinvested in his company. And he made investments for his retirement. But you know how companies and retirement investments can go. He experienced over his lifetime severe losses. And it led him to say what I consider to be his greatest quote. Quote, "What I kept, I lost. But what I gave, I still have." I think that might be what Jesus was talking about when he talked about the contrast between those who store up for themselves and those who are rich towards God. 3 questions. 3 questions to ask yourself. 3 questions to ask with your spouse. 3 questions to ask with someone besides yourself and your spouse sitting at the table. So there's some honesty there with you. Number 1, am I guilty of money blindness? If I am, I resolve to open my eyes to how money is deceitful. Motivations for wealth are deceiving. Greed is lurking at the door. Money is not my security. Money should not be used to attract. God feeds the birds. God clothes the grass. Money's not the answer. Number 2, am I suffering from money sickness? Are we ignoring the warning signs of gloating, worry, resentment, chasing after it, inability to give it away? And number 3, does my spending, does my savings, does my giving align with God's values? When we unload the burden of having to keep up with the Joneses, when we're released from thinking one more thing will satisfy that longing of my heart, we just might find out what it means to be truly blessed as God's stewards as we make it our mission to bless others.